It's one of the more weird seasons I've been around, even though it wasn't very exciting on the ice. But the first half of the season, like I don't know, you've been around this league longer than I have. To have a coach firing, to have an assistant GM depart ways with the organization, to have the head person of your organization, Bill Guerin, investigated in an HR manner. Team travel services guy Andrew Heydt left the organization, and I think people ask us in the mailbag all the time or on Twitter, like, what's going on, or is there more updates, or what can't you tell us? And I think people don't understand kind of our business and how it works and what things we might know versus what things we can actually report. And I wanted to see if you could maybe answer that to some fans of like, hey, this is a little more complicated issue than just me spitballing with you on Twitter about what we think we might know.
Yeah, exactly. First of all, everything you just said happened in a span of a week. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, in John Hines' first month on the job, I don't think he saw Bill Guerin. So, I mean, like he was basically, gone. And he lost his team services guy and found out the assistant GM that was right there when he was hired was fired. I mean, look, I think that you and I have a lot of pride in the job that we do, and we want to report everything that we know to the fans. And I think it's a bane of our existence that we haven't been able to tell people exactly what's going on here. There's a lot of complexities to the matter. In the Andrew Heydt situation, he signed a non-disclosure agreement, so he's not talking publicly, and so there's just only so many things that we could report from that. People. Let's be honest. The only reason why people know that he's even gone from the organization is because what you and I reported. And we, to the best of our ability, told you what it was for. That there was essentially a fight, a verbal argument between Bill Guerin and Andrew Heydt, and he went to HR about it, and it was essentially Bill stays or Andrew Heydt stays. They did a behind-the-scenes investigation. The team chose clearly Bill. Now, I will say Andrew had the ability to stay, but didn't want to stay in that environment, and left with a separation package and signed an NDA. So that's just the extent of really what we could report on there. There were stuff behind the scenes that was investigated with Bill Guerin. The NHLPA looked into it. The NHLPA talked to different players, and the NHLPA has told us there's nothing further to this matter. So unless the NHLPA is going to say basically go public here, there's nothing that we can write more on that. The Chris O'Hearn thing is one that frustrates me all the time. We think that we know what happened. We know what it was about. But there's just so many holes to the story that's impossible to report that we just can't report it. So, I mean, it's that simple. We don't know how it was found out. We don't know who made the Wild fire him. We don't know what the like, there's just too much, like we can't just say, we know it was that he left because of this broad reason, really, like we can't do it. And so, and it's just, and the other thing is that he's so respected by people inside the Wild that obviously they're not talking. They're protecting him. They don't want his career to end because of this thing that happened. That it has nothing to do with like any like personal conduct or anything like that. He just made a mistake in his job, and it was, and in the league's mind and clearly the Wild's mind, it was fireable. But it's not something that, like, I'd love to report it. Trust me. And it's just not something that we can, because there's just 1,000 holes to it, and it's just. Right now, it's impossible to get out there.
And the story might come out eventually, but it's hard to, you can't just do bits and pieces. Like, I heard a little bit about this, and it's not a 140 character kind of context. You can't just put it all.
Look, he's not talking to. He signed an NDA, so like it's just once people sign those things, I mean, it just becomes a lot more difficult for us to do the job, and especially in the standpoint of Chris, who is so liked and respected inside the organization. It's like everybody is just, the people that do know, which are very, very few people inside the organization, very few. I mean, trust me, they're just not willing to do it, say anything. So it's just, trust me, if I was a fan and didn't know all this context, I'd be looking at you and I and be like, what? Like, we deserve to know. And I think you do deserve to know. The assistant GM was fired in December, a guy that the night before he was let go, we were in Seattle and I had dinner with at the press room table, and he clearly had no idea that this was going on behind the scenes, because he was, we were joking around about John Lazat and Connor Dewar making their NHL debut in Seattle a couple of years ago, and things like that. Like, it just, like, trust me, I'd love to report it. It's just, unfortunately, you just can't.
Yeah. Any timeline for filling those vacancies?
Yeah, I think it's going to happen. I think Bill Guerin knows what he wants to do. My gut says it's going to be a couple people. One that's sort of like, on the hockey side, and the other more like a contract negotiator, analytics. So sort of like a lot of teams do, is, kind of a multi-pronged, split the responsibilities up. So usually the way this stuff works is that next week, the organization has a retreat with Craig Leopold, and usually the people at that are Jeff Pellegrin, their chief financial officer, Matt Naka, their CEO, Bill Guerin, the president of Hockey Ops and GM, and Craig Leopold. And they meet somewhere, and they not only go over the plan for next year, but they go over the budget. And I think that if they're doing what I'm sensing they're going to do, and have multiple assistant GMs, that changes the budget of maybe what Bill Guerin's front office would be. And if that's the case, then, you sort of need approval from Pellegrin and Craig Leopold. So my gut says that, at some point, early to mid-May, we'll have a good sense of what it happens. I'm sure I would hope that Bill's looking outside the organization, but I know that there's a couple people inside the organization that he has great respect for, that he might look at promoting. Matt Sells is somebody that has just skyrocketed up the chain. Started off as an analytics guy, became their VP there. And this year, without Chris O'Hearn there, he's been negotiating contracts and really working their cap. And he makes a lot of sense to me. Another guy that makes a ton of sense to me is Chris Kelleher, because he's the director of player personnel. He's been with his organization 17 years, hired originally by Doug Risebrough. And he's very tight with Bill Guerin, so much so that he's also the director of player personnel for the Four Nations face-off and the Olympics for the USA hockey team that Bill Guerin's running. So those are two potential internal candidates. And then I know that Joe and I always feel that, it's never a bad idea to look outside the organization and try to get fresh ideas.